Thank you for taking this video call, Mr. Genis. How are you?
Great, thank you.
Спасибо большое за ваше время. We can confess we are recording this interview in view of the 30th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. So, Mr. Genis, you are a Russian-American writer. You are a columnist, a contributor for the main liberal Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, correct? And a broadcaster for Radio Svoboda, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And Radio Free Europe, I read, and Radio Liberty. So you are traveling a lot in this period for launching your work Kartinki z Wystavki, which is also the title, maybe I don't remember, of a music composition by Modest Petrovich Mussorgsky, correct? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So in Italian, the title sounds like something like quadri d'esposizione, we can say. So can you talk about this your work you're launching in this period?
The problem is that my last three books, it's some kind of trilogy. I wrote a book about my life. It's called Return Address, and it's just my life from Riga to America and between. And I wrote another book that's called Kamasutra Knizhnik. It's means book reader Kamasutra. And this is about my life amongst books. And the third book is Kartinki z Wystavki, the pictures at the exhibition. And this is my life among the paintings. So I try to write down whatever I love more than anything else. And I have two other books that's waiting for publishing. Now one book is about traveling. It's called The Cosmopolitan. And the fifth one and last one, it's difficult to translate, but it's about culinary. So we have 5 subjects most important in my life, and we try to write all of them as a love letter to readers, because I write only about things I will love. It's a different subject for Russian literature, because Russian classics never write about their lives. They write about life itself. Very often it's a tragedy, like Dostoevsky. But I'm another guy. I'm not Dostoevsky, as you can understand very easily. And I love to share my life with anything that is important in my life. So it's a very personal, all of them.
Okay. Introducing you, I told you are a Russian-American or American-Russian writer. And anyway, you are writing a lot of non-fiction books, very famous in Russia, in East European countries. Not only there, of course, but this seems to be still a common fate for Russian writers, I mean, choosing to live abroad. Is this so? What brought you in 1977 to leave Russia and move to US?
It's very easy to answer, because I wanted to be a writer. And when I was 24 years old and I lived in Brezhnev's Russia, I don't have any chance to become a writer, and I never have chance to publish my works. So I moved to America with only one purpose: to write and publish my things in Russia. It sounds very stupid, but I was not alone. There were a lot of Russian writers on this time. The best Russian writers in all our literature came to America, Paris, Israel. They works in immigration, like people like Brodsky, Berbatov, Aksyonov, many of them. All of them work in exile. But it's old tradition, you know. The best Russian writers besides Pushkin, because he wasn't allowed to move to outside Russia. They live and write in Europe through Genis, Dostoevsky, all of them, Gogol, of course, all of them love to be outside. All of them came to Italy one day or another and try to live there and write about Russia. So it's an old tradition.
Just a suggestion, if you can come nearer to the microphone, because the sound is not very good. Going on, I read that you love being outside, just like Pushkin and Dostoevsky, as you told to me.
No, not like Pushkin. Pushkin always tried to outside, but never was allowed to. And if he had a chance, I think that he stayed in Paris forever.
Oh, okay. But why United States and not, I don't know, other European countries like Netherlands or Denmark, which have been named the most democratic countries in Europe?
America, United States, was the bastion of Western power during the Cold War. And of course, I was dreamed about living in America because it was a great anti-Soviet power. And that was the reason why people came to America first of all. Best example is Brodsky, because he came to America because he said that it's the most important power in the world, and he wanted to live in the middle of everywhere, anything. And English language, that's important. All of us love English language very much because it was language of our favorite modern literature. It was language of Faulkner, Selznick. It was language of Beatles, and it was not language, but it was a country of jazz. This is especially important for people older than like Davlan or Brodsky. And I never complaining about this because New York is where I lived already 40 years. It's capital of the future, and I love New York very much. But you are right. I love Europe too. And a country like Netherlands is my favorite. I think that I will be more happy in Amsterdam than in New Amsterdam. But it's too late. And America became my country. No, I don't say that America. I say New York is my city. New York is more than country. And I think that I became not American, but New Yorker.
As a reader and writer, I read in a previous interview that you listed the contemporary Russian writers you find interesting. Vladimir Sorokin, Tatiana Tolstoya, Viktor Pelevin, Vladimir Makanin, Sergei Gandlevsky. Then you also say that you are less interested in what was written 2 years ago than in what was written 2 millennia ago. Can I ask you why, and if the Russian literature, is the Russian literature so bad today? What's missing in it?
I don't know, because I'm old enough to stop worrying about this stuff. When I was young, I was very involved in contemporary literary process. But I once read Thomas Stern Eliot said that after 50, you shouldn't read anyone's other books. And at least living author, and I prefer not to. So I can't say that I watch Russian literature very careful now, and I don't have opinion about a lot of writers. The writers whom you talked 2 minutes ago, all my friends, and I followed them from the beginning of their career, and I'm very glad that in Russian literature they took very important part in our heritage, and they know how to work with words. What about new authors? Don't ask me, ask young people. It's not my generation.
Okay. Next October, all over the world, every October of every year, all the literature magazines celebrate the anniversary of the Russian Revolution in 1917. And what do we celebrate this very year? And there still is anything to celebrate, in your opinion?
What's the most interesting part of the jubilee is that nobody knows this answer to this question, especially in Russia, especially in Kremlin, especially in Moscow, especially Putin, because they don't know how to relate to October Revolution. And it's a very strange situation because after all, now we have symbiosis of two different Russia. From one part, Stalin, and Stalin is the most important people for Russian people now. It's a lot of new monuments of Stalin. Stalin became again the most loved leader of Russia. But with the other end, the most important person now is Tsar Nicholas II. And right now, that Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia.
Okay.
Right now, they try to show the movie Matilda. It's about Nicholas II and his lover. And the problem is that everybody loves now the last Tsar and stuff. How they can united these two persons, I can understand. This is the situation of modern Russia because they mix up everything. They try to be the last communist and last Tsarist. Most important part is the empire. And Stalin and Tsar is the two parts of empire. How are you supposed to put October Revolution in this coordinates? I don't know, and they don't know. But I remember very well the last big jubilee of October 17. It was 1967. It was 50th anniversary of October Revolution. I was in Moscow. I was a schoolboy, but I still very well remember how it. What's interesting about this? At this time, it was 60s, everybody said the Russian Revolution was a great thing. Even dissidents love Russian Revolution. But they loved Lenin and they hated Stalin. And they said that Stalin spoiled everything Lenin wrote. And we're supposed to come back to revolution, simple, honest revolution guys. Of course, all were terrible people. But during 60s, we used to say that, okay, Lenin was good, Stalin was bad. Revolution was good, but after that, everything spoiled. And now, 50 years later, completely different picture. Lenin is very bad because he lost empire. And Stalin is very good because he established another empire. And that's why October Revolution is very difficult to say anything positive or negative because nobody knows how to connect. I think that all because we don't have something like the Nuremberg trial. And Communist Party never, Communist Party, GB, all these people, they never answer the crimes. Only after that we can have historical look or outlook of revolution of the Soviet past, of people who were the Stalin, everybody supposed to have just and very public trial. Only after that we will know what kind of revolutionary. And this is a difficult situation because I live in America. America got their revolution. No one asks, is it good or is it bad? Because it's already done. Other thing, it's French. French Revolution, nobody, they still don't understand how good is it or bad. But they have the Marseillaise, and it's still the country which was sourced in this revolution. But Russia doesn't have any clear idea about the past. No, they used to say that Russia is a country with the past which nobody can understand, nobody can determine what is the past, what is the past. The future and the past for Russia is possible to describe. And the situation is still the same as it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. It's still everything in question. That's how we celebrate it. or not celebrated. But anyway, we came to this jubilee and we don't know what to do with it.
Well, each person should find his own meaning in this celebration. I don't know. It's very difficult to say what they are celebrating. But
that everybody got different opinion. No, it's not like this. I, for example, know that October Revolution was a terrible tragedy for Russian people and for all of them, for all people who lived in the Russian Empire. So I don't have any questions about October Revolution. February Revolution, that's another story. That's, you know that in 1917 there was two revolutions, and the first one, February Revolution, made Russia the most liberal society in the world during this time. That was few short months when Russia was more liberal than any European country. But after that came Lenin and Bolsheviks. So it's not the big question, but it's not big question for me, but it's a very big question for Putin, for example, because he didn't know what to say about this.
Yes, you mentioned Lenin, but today we can still read an article by Lenin written in 1905 after the riots, 1905's riots. The article title is Partijная организация и партийная литература. Can you try to make a comparison with today's Russian literature status and differences and similarities, if there is any similarity with today's literature and past literature?
I'm afraid that you are the last person who read this article, me and you, because I'm forced to do it in university. But the difference is very great, because in 1905, Russian literature was one of the most important literature in the world. Russian classics became the envy of the whole European literature. I remember I read as English writers, they said that supposed to know how to write like Tolstoy or Chekhov. So it was a very good time for Russian literature, and it's because it's Silver Age, but actually it was not worth the Golden Age. Nowadays, literature is not important in Russia at all. Not only in Russia. I think we don't live at the time when literature can be important. Writer is not anymore more than writer. It's a very famous Russian poet, Shevchenko, once that poet in Russia is more than poet. But nowadays, poet in Russia is less than poet, and nobody really cares about writers. That's why we have freedom in literature, but not in television, for example. Putin censor very important to put everything out of TV view, so there wasn't true on television. But everybody can write anything because no one reads them anymore. It's not
pardon me? Anybody can write anything?
The circulation of Russian books now, it's like few thousands. And when I lived in Russia, in the Soviet Union, there was 100,000 was known. Not for for mystery story or for cheap novels. We don't have neither one nor other. But very important writers, very difficult writers, like Genis, for example. And 100,000 circulation was okay. It was, you can sell books like this for a day. Our first books, which was published in Russia in 1990, so 1990, it was the last year of the Soviet War. It was published with circulation of 100,000 copies, and it was sold in 1 week. But nowadays, only 5, 6, 7,000. That's normal. So it's not good for literature. The time is not good for this. Now we are talking about Facebook, about everything that internet, and that's where the future. That's where the something important, but not in books.
I see. You wrote a lot can you tell us your first time as writer? When did you decide to start writing, and how did you find an editor?
Editor, it was easy because when I wrote in America, and in America it was a very small community of readers, as you can imagine. But when after 1991, it were freedom in Russia, and it was a freedom, especially in publishing business. Editors waiting for me, so I never have problem with publishing my books in the Russia nowadays for last 25 years. I have friends among my publishers. First of all, Lena Shubina, who's the best editor in Russia. And I'm happy enough because people waited for my next book. It's very good for a writer because, as you know, writer is a very lonely profession. So if anybody wants to finish your book, it's already stimulus to write it.
I see. You wrote also Ginger Man, which is a collection of culinary essays, and Red Bread. Is eating your favorite subject? Maybe?
I don't see the big difference between different theme, subject. And somebody told me that food writing, for me, as a violin for Sherlock Holmes, it's something on the side. But I still believe that food can tell you about culture, not less than a writer or a painter, because every national recipe is can explain you a lot about people who eat this food. That's why I love travel, and that's why I always to other country or other city. I visited two places. First one is food market, and the other one is museum. And so I try to understand the people of this country through two perspectives, two points of view. And one of this is food, and it's very important for me because I believe if everything edible is important to understand, because the best thing that we can understand is what we can eat. It's a physical understanding of anything. So it's important to eat something before you can understand this culture. And it's a very good indicator, a very good passport for foreign culture. And because I visited 70 countries and I always eat national foods, not something very specific for this place, so I think I can understand other people more than if I would be prefer to eat in every country American.
Italian readers can read some of your article on the website Russia Beyond the Headlines. They are translated from English into Italian or from Russian into Italian. I don't know which is the original languages in which you wrote these articles. There are very interesting articles, and there's one in particular, one article about Sorokin. It is a 2013 article about, this is an analysis of the works written by this Russian contemporary writer. And Sorokin told that reality, that he studies the reality, nonetheless what an eye not used to pain cannot see. So what's the actually the reality all around us, and how do you live your reality as writer and as Russian American writer? I don't know if it's clear.
Reality for me, not only for me, but I think for everyone, who thinks about it. Reality is a process, not the thing. You can't understand reality. You can just come into it. Became closer if you smart enough to go in the right direction. But I'm not sure that I am ready to tell anything about reality. That's the problem with it. If you can describe it, it's wrong. You know, like Genis said, if you can explain what is Tao, it is not Tao. The same thing is reality. And talking about Sorokin, it's interesting. That's true that you can explain his reality because he always described something underneath. And I think that he is a great author, great writer of Russian conscience. That's what you can't see, you can't touch, you can't even explain. It's difficult. But Sorokin twice described how Russian, Soviet subconsciousness, and now Putin's regime subconsciousness, Russian subconsciousness. That's, I think, that he is the only author in nowadays in Russia who deserves the Nobel Prize. But I'm afraid he never get it because it's too painful to read him.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Genis, for your time. Thanks a lot, and I wish you a good stay in United States now that you just came back from Europe, and good luck with your works. We hope that near in the future, some Italian editor will decide to publish in Italy all your works published.
Let's hope for it. Thank you very much for your time and for your interesting questions.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Bye bye.